It's not like they added another, ball dominant player alongside Russ. That's another guy that needs the ball and, is going to be creative. They added a guy who literally could probably have 20 points on just pick and roll.
Welcome into another episode of Starting 502 Podcast. I am Jacob Lane, filling in for the host with the most, Pres Meyer, getting ready for his wedding this weekend. So gladly stepped in as we get closer to TBT, less than just a month away from the basketball tournament. It is time to kind of shift our focus from a complete roster with Pat Kelsey in the Louisville squad, the 2024 season, to now talking about TBT. And man, is it a big one for Louisville this year. The Ville is back for year two, led by Reese Gaines, Luke Hancock, and Keith Otto and folks on the coaching side. And the roster is star-studded. Of course, you've got Russ Smith, who brings back the ability to absolutely carry a team through the Elam ending. Peyton Siva, Chinano Anawaku, and Kyle Kuric, some other guys, some of the role players that we fell in love with, like a Nick Mayo and Omar Pruitt. And then this year, adding Montrezl Harrell, which we will get into it with our special guest on this episode, a little bit about that addition and what that means for this team, Chris Jones, guys like that. But the TBT, man, it is exciting time. Like I mentioned in the show, it is Christmas in July. So we'll be joined today by Andrew Zoldan, who is the voice of the social media voice for the TBT and also hosts the TBT podcast called Inside TBT. He does a little bit of basketball coverage outside of that with the Drive the Lane podcast and is one of my favorite guests that we've had on this show because of his basketball knowledge, because of his understanding of college basketball and these markets that are coming into TBT at a rapid rate and really bringing growth that's accelerated this from a small regional tournament to now a national draw where it's being covered by ESPN and Fox. And so Andrew and team have played a big role in that growth, and he does a great job not only on the basketball side, but also on the soccer side. That's one thing we don't talk about a ton here, but TST has been another huge element of growth and focus for them. And so for them now, they're shifting into basketball season, and the Ville it looks to be one of the most prominent teams, a team that is absolutely able to win the tournament and take that $1 million cash prize home. This roster is stacked, and we'll get into really how it measures up with not only the rest of the field, but also with the regional that Louisville has. And then, of course, look, there's a matchup that we're really staring at, a battle of the teams on 64. So you have Louisville, the Ville, and La Familia, the Kentucky team, playing in their first TBT. And as Andrew mentioned, it's going to be a challenge for both squads to get out of their brackets, but it is setting up potentially one of the biggest games in TBT history if they do meet. So we'll dive into all of that on this episode of Starting 502 Podcast on the State of Louisville Podcast Network. The show is brought to you by the fine folks at Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon. Make sure you check out the Russ Smith video we just did on the State of Louisville YouTube channel. Got to taste the TBT, the Ville bottle for the first time with Russ and sit down and kind of capture some of that business acumen and talk ball. Fantastic time. But for now, we'll jump into an interview with our good friend Andrew Zoldan of TBT. We'll be right back on the other side.
Mr. and Mrs. is for everyone, from a more traditional 90 proof to a cash string that's smoother. In 2013, Russ going to the hole, and boy, could we use that right now. Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon covers tastes, all different taste of preferences, 6 different bourbons that they're offering. Be among the first to try Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon, the official bourbon of the State of Louisville and the Starting 502 Podcast, on shelves anywhere you find your liquor, and now online at mrandmrsbourbon.com.
All right, Starting 502 Podcast, Jacob Lane here with the special guest. We love this time of year, man. They call this the dog days of summer, but when you have TBT, it doesn't feel so long. We're joined by a friend of the show, Andrew Zoldan, who is the host of Inside TBT and Drive the Lane podcast. How we doing, man? It's been a while.
I have a ton of excitement for the Louisville regional, a ton of excitement for TBT, but I'm a little nervous for this interview because last year I delivered a 10 out of 10 prediction. So I got to come back with something good. I have some ideas for my big prediction for this year, but I set the expectations too high last year.
Yeah, it's funny. I went back and as I was prepping for the show, I, re-listened and, went back to really kind of like put myself and immerse myself in last year's TBT to go through the heartbreak again. But I remember listening to it and I'm like, holy crap, man. I mean, this is like spot on first game of TBT. Russ goes on the run and all of that. And I'm like, man, Andrew is clearly does this for a living. When you can predict it down to that level, big basketball nerd like us, man. That's why we love having you on the show. First off, let me ask before we jump into TBT and we talk about just the tournament itself. And then, of course, want to talk about the Louisville team, the Ville, as they're back for year two. But just tell me what life has been like for you the last couple of months as you gear up with the soccer tournament and now the basketball tournament. How busy you been? Where have you been? What's life kind of been like for you?
Yeah, been a crazy few weeks, few months. Back in May, went down to Florida for some TST prep. We were with a team for training camp, Pat McAfee's team. And then we went to Cary, North Carolina for the soccer tournament, which was insane. Just a wild, wild, it's like 10 days being down there, 6 or so days of games. But then we have one of the big differences between soccer and basketball is all of the games are in the same place for the soccer tournament. So we have these 2 like mega media days, which are really cool. So yeah, we were rocking and rolling with the soccer tournament, but now it's TBT basketball season. I'm going to Louisville and Lexington this year at least, and then I'll be in Philly, may hit a couple other stops, but I'm so excited to be at the full regional this year for Louisville. Last year I caught 2 games, but I wasn't down there, experiencing the city and all that stuff. I kind of just came in, went to the game, and had to go back to, I was at the Dayton regional last year doing games as well. So I'm fired up to be there the whole time. And, fingers crossed for Louisville and Lexington fans, one of those places has a really good chance to host a quarterfinal as we announced. So it's going to be an exciting few weeks. The last, few months with soccer were awesome, but I am, and our team is full go basketball now.
Yeah, and really the popularity is at an all-time high for the tournament itself. I mean, just some of the teams we've seen enter this year. I mean, heck, you got to have Shaq on your show, man. Like what for you, that's got to be such a huge, just a big name and accomplishment to be able to have him on. But it speaks to the growth of TBT. And as we were kind of talking about before we got started, I can remember watching very early on in the days where it was played in, D2, D3 gyms or small NAIA schools, whatever the case was. And it looked like a bunch of guys from just up the street at the YMCA playing on television, to where now it's, broadcast on ESPN and Fox, and you have big personalities involved in the tournament and, playing in the tournament and all of that. So how would you just kind of describe the growth of TBT over the last few years?
Yeah, I'm laughing in my mind because I'm thinking of a joke of how I could say, well, Louisville fans probably think we're still playing in high school gyms going to Rupp.
Right.
But Rupp's a little too historic of a building to be able to even put, a Louisville Lexington rivalry joke on it. But the growth is a combination of many things. Obviously, the big name alumni teams help because they bring in the big name players, but the Elam ending is huge for the growth because, in the NBA, you could turn it on in the fourth quarter. It could be a 20-point blowout and maybe there'd be a really cool comeback, but the game's probably over. In TBT, you could turn it on in the under 4-minute mark and you're going to see a crazy finish. You're going to see a guy hit a wild shot to win the game and you're going to see guys, playing hard. There's no like play to the final whistle type mentality in TBT. Like you don't need to push anyone to, hey, keep playing, because the games in TBT truly are never over. There's no emptying the bench. There's no, there's only 30 seconds left. Let's get, the walk-ons in like in college basketball. Like these games are not over until they're over. So that was a big hurdle and a big jump for TBT growth overall, was how exciting the games were. But then of course it helps when, Russ Smith is promoting and playing in the event. It helps when Willie Cauley-Stein and Kentucky have a team. Connor Frankamp, the diehard college basketball fans know who that is. But now if you're a TBT fan, that's a household name. So the fans have been instrumental in the growth of TBT as well. I'm excited to see the attendance numbers this year. We throw around a lot. The single game attendance record 7,200, and I mean the Ville want to break that, if not in their first game, in each game that they get to play, assuming and hopefully they win and move on. But the Bellarmine alumni hope it goes the other way. But the fans, the Elam ending, and then the reach of these alumni teams and players have been what really has taken it to the next level.
All right, so let's rewind to last year. Louisville had a lot of hype going into the tournament, putting together kind of this, superstar stacked team with Russ Smith and Peyton Siva and Kyle Kuric, and bringing back a lot of guys that were on notable teams, and then finding kind of these TBT stars, if you will, and Nick Mayo and Chris Dow and some of the other guys that played with Louisville last year. But when you look back, what was kind of your assessment of Louisville's first shot at this in terms of how they played, their style, things like that?
Russ said this to me on the bracket reveal, that they wanted to win, but they also, it was a big reunion for them. They were all back together in the Ville. They were getting to see guys they hadn't seen or played with in a while. And they definitely had a lot of fun. And it's not to say that they won't have fun this year as well, but it's hard to focus on the games 1,000% when you get to see your buddies and fans and coaches that you hadn't seen in a long time. And Russ, admitted it, that they maybe lost focus down the stretch in some of those games last year, but they kind of sleptwalked through the first two games and had a chance to win the third game. So obviously there's a major addition to the roster this year that we're going to talk about, but they were a shot away from making it to the quarterfinals last year, and Bleed Green, now they're We Are Bleed Green, they ended up coming to Louisville and beating pretty, handedly that Gunner Cat team, which is now Team Diesel. So who knows if the Ville would have won that quarterfinal game, but it's not like they got blown out in that last game. They were right there. And, when if there was that like meter that's like winning percentage chance, they probably would have had a 99% win chance. And then they ended up letting the game slip away. So I thought the team last year was really good and really competitive. And I kind of agree with Russ. They maybe had a little too much fun, which I'm not saying they had too much fun, like they were going out and partying. It was just like, wow, I can't believe that this environment exists. We get to come back to Louisville, play in front of Louisville fans, wear Louisville jerseys essentially. So I think this year their mentality, it's a pretty similar team, plus Pres, but the mentality is last year was fun, let's have fun this year by winning it.
Yeah, that's a great assessment of last year. If you think back on Nanu throwing the underhand granny free throw to try to seal the game, which I'm here for the theatrics of that. But when it doesn't go in and you ultimately end up kind of struggling, I think that was in game 2 against the Jackson team where he did that. But
then he switched into Pumas in the third game because you get an extra 1,000 if you hit the game winner in Pumas. I remember on the sideline going, I don't know if I'd be worried about switching into the Pumas right now, but the shot ultimately was insane that they lost on. Yeah. Which, if you're a TBT and basketball fan, if you're a Louisville fan, you're upset. But as a basketball fan, just an unbelievable ending to a game to stun the home crowd.
Yeah. I was a big fan of Jarrell Eddy. He was fantastic. That team was, brought in a bunch of dudes that had, been in the NBA for a little bit or, had a ton of experience, and they kind of showed that. And one of the things that stood out in our conversation last year, if you remember, as you said, a lot of these teams, it takes them a couple of years. They've got to kind of get in there, get their feet wet. And if you look back at Louisville, and we'll talk about this throughout the entirety of the show here, but, Kuric didn't necessarily play extremely great. Russ was kind of, really hot early, and then kind of, at the end was, wasn't able to get it going as easily. Peyton obviously dealt with some injury, and then, Wayne and Luke were guys that were great to have out there and great to see, but they were not necessarily going to push you over the edge if they got out there on the floor. They both played well, especially Luke. I mean, Luke's playing on a completely reborn Achilles. I'm like, man, I can't believe he's doing this. He's actually playing basketball, but he came in and played well, right? So there was a lot of room for Louisville to grow, and hopefully some of that that magic that the Cats had when they knocked down that three. Louisville kind of remembers what that feels like. And so let me ask you this, okay? We kind of teased on this, but you came on the show last year and you nailed the prediction, right? You said Russ that you could totally see it being feasible. Russ coming into a game with a target score, he scores every point in that run to the target score to finish the game, and ultimately hits the game winner. That's exactly what happened in the first game, and it was fantastic. I mean, it was the energy in that building is something in the midst of what Louisville was going through basketball wise with University. We needed that. We needed to feel that energy again. But how would you kind of measure up Russ, who was the star of that team, to maybe some of the other great names that have played in TBT in their first try at it?
I think the stretch he had in the Elam ending made it such a historic TBT debut. Corey Brewer played that morning in the Ville in his first ever TBT game. And I think he had like 27 points. He was unbelievable, but they lost. And he didn't hit an Elam ender, and that Florida team's not back this year. So that's almost like a forgotten performance in TBT history. But the fact that Russ had all 8 points in the Elam ending, the fact that the court was branded with Mr. and Mrs. Bourbon when he's hitting it, like that, those are all key moments that make and made his debut so special. A lot of these guys, like Trey Scott played last year for Nasty Natty. I can't remember 100% if it was his first ever TBT appearance, but he didn't play until the quarterfinals of last year. And he showed up and he had like 22 points, 6 dunks, was throwing down alley-oops, but then, they lost. Right. So that moment of hitting the Elam ender and advancing the team with that packed crowd, I think it was a top 5 attended game in TBT history in the first ever game. I may have that number wrong. It was definitely top 10, but that made it such an impactful moment. And you add on top that the program was struggling a little bit from a basketball standpoint. Like it felt like this not only is something special for TBT, but this is something special for Louisville basketball. And I kind of can't believe the vibe of the program now versus a year ago. And I don't think it has anything necessarily to do with TBT, but you can feel it during TBT. You could feel last year that the fans want Louisville basketball back and to be great. So just all of that going into it made Russ's debut so special. Jimmer hit deep threes in his TBT debut. Aaron Kraft was doing, Aaron Kraft stuff, but I don't remember anyone coming in their TBT debut in front of a crowd like that and having all 8 Elam ending points. Jonte Porter, funny person to mention, was insane in his TBT debut last year, and then great again against the Kansas team. So it's kind of easy to score. Scoring doesn't necessarily make the difference. What makes the difference is what you do in that Elam ending.
Yeah, and he wanted the moment again so bad. I can't remember. I get the second and third game mixed up, but I think it was the game against the Gutter Cats where he wanted to finish that game for Louisville and just couldn't do it. The shot wasn't there and struggled. But, for a Louisville fan, like you mentioned, like the energy was needed at that time. It kind of was the juice that had been missing for a little bit. And this year, man, Matt Kelsey might get out there and lead Chance in the middle of the court, rip his shirt off, get the crowd hyped at Freedom Hall, and set that place on absolute fire. So I think that we're just beginning to see what Louisville will look like from a TBT standpoint as we transition into 2024. So let's talk about the addition of Montrezl Harrell. To me, now, again, I am a newbie compared to a guy like you. You're going to know the history of the players that have played in this tournament much more than I. But in my mind, at least this year, he's got to be the top player in TBT. I mean, you're talking about former NBA Sixth Man of the Year, NBA champion, really only out of the league because he was, dealing with a torn ACL, and now is really trying to play with a chip on his shoulder to get back in the league. And I don't think anybody wants to see again from the basketball side outside of Louisville fans what an angry Montrezl Harrell looks like. So, in your opinion, like how big of a deal is this for Louisville and the tournament in general?
I think it's a huge deal because there's a lot of guys who hang it up in the NBA and then are like, all right, I'll find a TBT team. But this was Trez who, wasn't even planned to be a part of the initial team announcement this year. Not sure if you remember X amount of months ago, we just announced, Siva and the team were back.
Yeah.
And then an hour later, we announced Trez. That happened like in the days leading up. He was like, no, I'm healthy. I'm playing. I said last year I want to play. I'm playing. So not only is he playing for a school and a fan base that loves him, but he's playing because he's trying to prove I'm still an NBA player. I'm still a pro basketball player. So sometimes you get non-NBA players trying to prove that they belong in the NBA, but it's been pretty rare in TBT where a guy is trying to say, hey, I was injured. I'm trying to prove that I still belong versus I'm trying to prove I belong the first time. Gabe York last year, he had a few games where he played in the NBA.
Yeah.
That's not a guy like Montrezl Harrell trying to say I, still belong in the NBA. That's a guy saying my TBT run plus the few games I had in the NBA should be enough for me to say, hey, I belong there. Trez is saying I haven't gone anywhere. I want a new contract. I want another deal. I want another chance at, an NBA championship. So he's hungry and he's excited. I've seen some clips of him. He looks damn good. He's been playing in the Drew League, throwing down.
Yeah. Oh, he's fun in the Drew League,
people.
man. That's going to translate so well to TBT. With the ball in his hands, things like that. He's going to be a star,
He definitely looks a little bigger than
he does. Yeah.
But I mean, in TBT, that's going to be really, really hard to stop. There's not, the stretch 4s and 5s that there are in the NBA where you really need to be able to, close out and stay with your guy. Obviously, you need to be able to do that, but having a bruiser in Trez is pretty damn, impactful. So I can't wait to see him. I think the first Russ to Trez lob is going to absolutely bring Freedom Hall down. And I think it's going to take Trez 2 minutes to be all in and doing his Trez stuff, being emotional, being fired up. I think we're going to see things from him that, Louisville fans haven't seen in a long, long time. Diving on the floor, really embodying what Louisville basketball is all about. I can't wait to watch him. And I know that the team is excited too. Like, it's not like they added another, ball dominant player alongside Russ. That's another guy that needs the ball and, is going to be creative. They added a guy who literally could probably have 20 points on just pick and roll with Russ and offensive rebound putbacks. I'm sure he's going to try and say, look at my game. I can step out and hit some threes. I can do this. I can do that. But they want to win. So It's a combination of he wants to win and he wants to prove he should still be back in the NBA. It's going to be awesome. There definitely are some teams in the regional that could give him some problems. I just can't imagine there's going to be anyone early on that's like a Trez stopper, but we'll see. Anything can happen in TBT, but I in my mind, I have my game 1 prediction, and it's actually not about Trez. So whenever you want to tap that in.
Okay, let's go. We'll circle right back to the roster and kind of continue to touch on some of this, because I do think that this roster, top to bottom, can compete with anyone in this tournament. But I do want to hear your prediction, because I thought I was getting it a little bit ago when you talked about it'll take 2 minutes to set the house on fire with a lob. So what do we have? I'm here for this. Let's go.
We'll get an early Russ to Trez lob for sure. If not Siva, I don't know how much Siva is going to play. Obviously, he's not playing professionally anymore. Last year he had the injury, but his game is very, it'll age very well. He's similar to Aaron Kraft in the sense that, the way he would play in a pickup game is how he would play in TBT or if he was in the G League or anything like that.
Right.
So I think we'll see a very early on Siva or Russ to Trez alley-oop, which will be awesome.
Amazing.
But then my big prediction is, you mentioned earlier, this team needs Kyle Kuric going.
Yes.
Kyle Kuric, if the Ville wins round 1, will hit the Elam ending 3 to win the Ville's opening round game. If it comes down to that, where they're in a position to win the game, it'll be Keurig who knocks down the three, because I think Russ knows. I think Pres knows. I think the coaching staff knows. We need Keurig knocking down threes this whole tournament if we're going to have a chance to win the $1 million. And what better way to have him feeling good than that first Elam ender? So that's my prediction. Keurig. What's he got? He's got Kyle's Korner, right?
Kyle's Korner, man. Yeah.
He's hitting
Especially in
the
that
Elam
building.
ender from Kyle's Korner in Freedom Hall.
You talk about, replicating an iconic moment, the Trez alley-oop from Peyton or Russ, and then a Keurig three from the corner. I mean, these are nostalgic Louisville moments that will not only be big moments in TBT, but the basketball relevancy for the fan base and all of that will be really fun to kind of tap into. But you mentioned Kyle Keurig, and I kind of hinted at the roster and how stacked they are. They bring back Chinano Onuaku and Kyle Keurig, and then Nick Mayo and Omar Pruitt, Peyton Sieve and Russ Smith. Pruitt and Nick Mayo were really great role players for this team last year. And then they bring Chris Jones, who absolutely torched Louisville playing for the Jackson, Tennessee Underdogs last year. I sat with some family members of folks that played on that team for that game, and it was just incredible. Like I did not expect them to compete with Louisville like that. So he will be a great addition. And then, of course, I mentioned you have Montrezl Harrell. So when you look at this team, top to bottom, just roster wise, I mean, I know there were some teams with maybe bigger names, but this is a team I would think that could contend to win the whole tournament.
Yeah, Jones is a huge addition, because you don't really know what you're going to get 100% from Siva. And if Russ was truly like the only facilitator and scorer, then, he's going to get tired.
Right.
And I think what Jones opens up is maybe Russ doesn't come off the court that much, because he really didn't come off the court at all last year, but he doesn't need to be the scorer the whole time. He can be distributing to Chris Jones, and Chris Jones can create off the dribble. I think he's a huge pickup. Obviously, for him to score 25 or what he did last year, someone else would have to score less, so there would be less scoring. But let's say you add, plus 12 total points being able to score to the team. Maybe you're getting closer to 20 if you combine, Trez and what you're getting out of Chris Jones. Talk about the Kentucky team is one thing, because they had nothing last year, and now they have Cauley Stein, Bledsoe, all those guys.
Right.
But to have as good of a team as they had last year, and then to add Chris Jones and Montrezl Harrell, I mean, the sky is the limit for this team. But I don't want to get too excited just because you saw it firsthand last year. I've seen it a million times in TBT. When you get to that Elam ending, anything can happen. Right. But the roster is built for a deep run. The roster is built for Russ is struggling, but Chris Jones just had 17 in the first half. That kind of stuff is going to happen. Chinanu Onuaku has 2 quick fouls, but Trez has been in the whole game. And now Nick Mayo, like they're not super deep, but they have a strong, 7 or so, whatever it is. They have 3, guys who could play the 5. That's pretty rare. I'm interested to see what, combinations are able to be put out there, because Trez traditionally was a 4 in his career, but now he's a little bigger. He's coming off an injury. Probably needs to be in a 5 position when you consider the size of who's playing in TBT. But Mayo kind of can stretch the floor a little bit. So I'm interested to see what that 4-5 combo will be, and not just the starting lineup, but like what the most effective use of those 3 guys will be.
Absolutely. I mean, I love all 3 of them and how they can fit together. Nanu and Montrez on the floor at the same time might open up some liabilities from, an offensive standpoint or defensive if you're playing a team with a little bit of a smaller, stretched out shooting team. But with Nanu and Harrell, though, in terms of being able to dominate and own the paint, it's going to be far and few between the number of teams that can kind of stack up, at least on paper. But as like we saw, it doesn't take a team filled with stars necessarily to win a regional and to be able to move on. And before we talk about the rest of the bracket, because I do think it's very interesting. There's some new teams and some very interesting twists and turns that TBT is so good at just throwing out that you would never think of. But I want to ask you about Reece Gaines. I don't know if you were a big NBA fan growing up like I was, but Reece Gaines obviously was one of the first players in my lifetime that I saw as a Louisville fan go to the NBA. And while his career wasn't, as long as many would have liked to have seen or expected, he still holds a special place in Louisville basketball history. And then being able to go on and play at that next level, it opened the doors for some of the guys who followed behind him. And now with him as head coach, you're talking about a guy who's been on a D1 coaching staff for the last, 7-8 years. He's coached in other places and is a clutch player of himself, right? If you remember the moment against Tennessee where he scored 12 points in the final couple minutes to bring Louisville back and win that game. But what do you think of his addition and how he takes over? You put Luke Hancock on the sideline with him now, take the jersey off. Keith Otto, who's trains guys like Jordan Wara and some other players and is a college basketball coach as well. I mean, that's a legitimate staff they have together that really can help guide this ship.
I think it's just a testament to TBT and the Ville as a whole is that they're running it like, a real team and a real organization where they have different levels and they have different types of coaches. Hancock's obviously a smart player, but he's a radio host, right?
And yeah, it does. I think he's like a financial analyst, like for a full-time gig, manages money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're getting an incredible coaching mind, but you have someone, and I'm sure he is a great coach, but you have someone who knows these guys, can connect with the players. So when Reece is giving his spiel, you have Luke, who's respected by the guys. And of course, Reece is respected as well. But you have a great 1-2 punch of basketball knowledge and coaching. And also, hey, this is your friend, Luke Hancock. I won a national championship with you. Trust me when I tell you, this is what we need to run. This is what we need to do. Or Keurig, you're an incredible shooter, but trust me when I tell you you're getting the ball out half a second too late because I've been seeing the film on this guy on United and he contests really, really high, so you have knowledge and you also have experience. And then, Reece Gaines being around the program, Siva and Reece, I'm sure are extremely tight. And Siva's a whole extra Siva's a
literally
coach on the court.
Now. Yeah. Right,
so you have he's a coach now, A, and B, talk about a guy that's going to run your team. He's the floor general. Seth Greenberg last year said Peyton Siva has a PhD in basketball. So you just have so many good basketball minds. And I think Luke is the perfect guy to kind of be like, guys, no, listen to Reece. He's watching this. But then also Luke's the kind of guy to be like, hey, Reece, Siva's out there on the court. Let's hear what he has to say as we head into the Elam ending. So I think they're nailing it with like a legitimate and quality coaching staff. You're seeing it kind of across TBT where most guys have coaching experience. The one outlier over the years has been Jared Sullinger, just like randomly decided to coach the Ohio State team and
Right.
They won. So now he's like a respected coach within
TBT coach. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I think they're doing it the right way. They have a good coaching staff. You mentioned, they have good trainer. They're going to be back in the Ville soon for practice and training. I know Russ is already back in town. Obviously,
Yep.
Steve is there. I think Pres is bouncing back and forth between Louisville and LA. So, yeah, they've put together from top to bottom players and coaches combined a really fun and exciting team. But the coaching staff is great. And the fans, that's been like what the fans were number one most excited about was the Reece and Luke announcement combo.
Yeah. To be honest with you, when you start to think about, all right, who's going to coach this team, there's not so many names that kind of come to the forefront. And with Reece, he'd been on staff the last couple of years, and it's a great opportunity to put him from more of a secondary behind the bench type of role where the players have worked with him very closely and the people in Louisville's program know him, but the fans haven't gotten to see that coaching side of a player that was so beloved in the early Patino days. But you mentioned the challenges of winning TBT and the field, and there is certainly no lack of strong teams here. I mean, this is a very strong bracket that Louisville will be playing in. Obviously, the 2 seed behind Team Diesel, which, as you mentioned, is now the Gutter Cats. So they're bringing back the squad. I assume a good chunk of that team is going to look the same. You've got Louisville in there, and then you've got the United squad with Bellarmine, which I assume I have not looked at. I assume Chris Dow is playing on that, which I'll give him the pass if he did play on that team versus playing with the Ville. One of my favorite players from last year, and a guy that I remember in game one nearly got into it with one of the players from the opposing team, was very feisty and willing to kind of risk it out on the floor. So it'll be fun, man. But what do you think of the field and how this kind of measures up from a team standpoint, and kind of who the competitors will be that Louisville fans need to watch out for?
Well, United will be a fun matchup round one, because I don't know how big the Bellarmine fan base is necessarily, but I've seen some clips and they get a decent amount of fans at Freedom Hall, so you would hope that this is a very, very high attended game. So that'll be a fun round one. And if the Ville wins, I kind of don't really know what to expect in their second round game, because sideline cancer has become a staple of TBT. They've posted the other day, they've made it to the round of 16, I think 6 times that they've been in TBT, and they're hoping that trend obviously continues this year. A little bit of a different roster for them this year. But then the VBL winner, we don't really necessarily know who is going to be that VBL winner and who is going to be that team. There's a chance that that's a really, really good team that not only could beat Sideline, but could give the Ville a run for their money. But then there's also a chance it's not that good of a team. And that's why they're the 6th seed, because you're not going to give them a 1 or a 2 seed, but it wouldn't really be fair to give them an 8 seed and potentially knock off the number 1 seed if they are, and if they do end up being a high quality team. So there's a little bit of a question mark of what's going to happen moving forward. Team Fredette is, obviously when you hear Fredette, you think Jimmer. It's actually his brother's team. His brother's leading the charge, and they've had different iterations of the team in the past, the money team where Floyd Mayweather was running it. So kind of a different roster for them. This is going to be kind of obvious, but this region should go through the Ville and Team Diesel, the 1 and the 2 seed. Team Diesel, obviously it looks a little different. Sharif O'Neal's on the team. It's not quite the same guys as, the Gutter Cats last year, but it's setting up for a good run for the Ville. And obviously there's just going to be a few opportunities where Sideline Cancer could pull a rabbit out of their hat for the roster and make and put together a really high quality team come, roster deadline, and look pretty scary staring at the Ville potentially in round 2. So round 2 and round 3 could be really, really tough games. But the one thing that this region is missing, for lack of a better term, is that, iconic player that could make a deep run. We're not sure what the Sideline Cancer team is going to look like. In the past, they've had Marcus Keene, who was like kind of like the Kemba Walker of TBT. Like, you just give him the ball and he's going to win you 3 games. But we don't know what these rosters are going to ultimately end up 100% looking like. We see what they are as of now. It's all updated on the site, but there's just not that like killer in this region. Depending on what Team Diesel puts together, they could have that. But you remember last year, QJ Peterson on the Gutter Cats, he was the best player in the region. And that's no disrespect to Russ or anything like that, but he was the best player in the region, besides maybe Corey Brewer, who I guess, they lost first round. But even that's missing from this regional this year too. There's no Maryland team with Daryl Morcell, who is exciting to watch. There's no, Corey Brewer, former NBA guy, 2-time national champion. Like, that team is not here this year, which you could look at a few different ways. It could be easier for the Ville to come out of it, or it could be, hey, we don't really know too much about these teams. Hopefully we don't underestimate any of them. But I think they'll get a wake-up call in round 1 from like a motivated, united team. And who knows, based on how the bracket shakes out, the third best team in the bracket could be United. We'll see. So Yeah, exciting bracket, sets up well for the Ville and Team Diesel to, the 1 and 2 seed to clash in the round of 16, but we'll see, man. And then, you always run the risk of we get to the round of 16, Lexington, Kentucky's already advanced, La Familia, and the Ville knows, if we win this game, we're hosting against La Familia, or, if we win this game, we have to go to Lexington. So you never know when that kind of stuff is going to start creeping in. So game by game is super important. But I do think Sideline Cancer is probably the team that could do the most disruption, the 3 seed. Oh, I know. I'm so clever saying the 1, 2, and 3 seed.
Yeah, right. Wow, man, this guy knows his basketball. Yeah. I swear. No, Sideline Cancer is actually before the Ville became a thing. Was the team that both Trey Lewis played for, that played his final year here at Louisville, and then Remy Abel, who is a high school classmate of mine and played at Xavier. Oh, really? Yeah, and has played. I think he's playing again with Team X with the Xavier team this year. So, TBT. The fans are just now starting to kind of come in masses, but for years, Louisville guys have played. Yeah, Jerry Smith and Preston Knowles and other guys. And I think as the team does, kind of the things that we expect them to, there's going to be more and more players that decide that they want to play for the team. So last thing, let's talk a little bit about the Louisville and Kentucky rivalry. You mentioned it. La Familia is the team, and they have really put together a star-studded team. I was talking with some buddies the other day. They're a little bit younger than the Louisville team. They're bringing back some more guys that have played recently, like a Reed Travis and some of the other guys on the squad. And, of course, the star power with Eric Bledsoe and Willie Cauley-Stein kind of matches that of Louisville. But how important is a rivalry like that in the growth of TBT? And then this might be too early to ask you this, but let's just say they meet, right? And whether it be in Louisville and Lexington, where do you think that matchup from an interest and just, attendance, where do you think that would match up in the all-time great non-championship TBT matchups?
If the Ville or La Familia do not break the record on the way to the quarterfinals, it will happen in the quarterfinals. Right. It's such a unique scenario where you got, let's say 5,000 plus are going to each of the Ville's games and 5,000 plus are going to each of La Familia's games. Now, all of a sudden you can bring 10,000 plus to one of the two arenas, or even 8,000 would be, the record breaker. But Wichita is probably going to try and break their own record this year. But this game would be so massive. And obviously in a perfect world, there would have been a scenario where you could set it up in round 2, like in Cincinnati last year. Xavier and Cincinnati alumni teams were there, and they played in the second round. Yeah. And Cincinnati won at Xavier, but you can't do that when both teams have their own regional. They can't meet. It's not like they could meet in the regional final. They could meet in the quarterfinals, and right. I think it would be extremely cool and exciting and bring a lot of national eyes that maybe had not watched TBT in the past to the Ville versus La Familia, whether it's watching on Fox. I forget exactly what channel it would be on, but watching on, Fox, FS1, FS2, or being at the game. I could see this attracting fans from, neighboring areas. Cincinnati is not too far from, the Ville or Lexington. You could see fans from there going. Dayton's not too bad of a drive. You could see fans going there, so I really think would be a monumental moment if those teams did end up meeting in the quarterfinals. But La Familia has a tough road. If they win their round 1 game, they potentially play the Wofford alumni, which could bring back some old memories.
Oh, man, I'm totally here for that.
Yeah. But then if they win that, the regional final could potentially be against Heard That, who made the semifinals last year, and they returned basically the same team, plus they added Xavier Munford. So they're a really, really, really good team. The overall 1 seed, if TBT had that, would probably be Heartfire in Dayton because they're the defending champs. But this Heard That team is really special. So there's a lot that has to happen for those two teams to meet. But if they do, it's something to be excited about for sure.
All right, last question. We'll get you out of here. Top 2 or 3 storylines from the full tournament standpoint that you're kind of watching, or that fans that are getting into it this year should really be watching for.
I think Wichita has a really tough road, and they've made the quarterfinals every year, the last 3 or 4 years, whatever it's been. 2 of those, or one of those years, they made the semifinals, but they have to beat potentially the Kansas State alumni with Jacob Pullen, or the Colorado alumni with Andre Roberson and Evan Batty in round 2. And then if they win that game, they potentially have to beat Frank Mason and Thomas Robinson in round 3 just to get to a quarterfinal. So I think this could be a year where the Aftershocks really, face some hard opponents. And last year they actually almost lost in round 2 to the Memphis alumni team, but they do not have an easy road to the quarterfinals by any means. So I would say the Wichita region as a whole is a big storyline to watch. We'll skip the possibility of La Familia versus the Ville because we just talked about it, obviously. But I think you got to look to the second round for TBT as a whole. You potentially could get, as I just mentioned, Aftershocks versus Purple Rain, which is K-State alumni. In Dayton, you could get, it could be Red Scare versus Carmen's Crew in round 2. And then there's a bunch of craziness that could happen in Pittsburgh because the second round in Pittsburgh could feature UConn alumni, Penn State alumni, West Virginia alumni, and Pitt alumni if all 4 of those teams advance. So the second round is shaping up to be electric in TBT. Last year, more of the first round games were electric and exciting. Like the fact that it was Florida versus Maryland in round 1 in Louisville was extremely exciting. But this year it's set up more for, what are these second round matchups going to look like? And what's the regional final going to look like? So I would just say overall, if you look at the bracket, take a look at the potential second round games. I mean, we even look in the Ville, probably the biggest team in TBT this year, going alongside La Familia, the Kentucky team. In the second round, they could play the staple of TBT, who've been in TBT every single year. And it's not like that was set up because it's a incredible TV matchup or anything like that. It was set up because there's 8 regions and you're going to play a good team in the second round, in the first round, but definitely in the second round. So if you're looking at the bracket and you're looking for storylines, look at the second round in each region because there's just some massive, massive potential second round matchups that personally I'm fired up for. Obviously, I'm excited for the first 2 days where there's, 8 games each day. 16 games each day because there's 32 round 1 games.
Right.
So those 2 days are going to be great. But then when you get to day 3 and day 4, it's going to be electric with those second round games.
It's literally Christmas in July, man. We get a full month or so worth of very competitive basketball with very well-known names. It's fantastic. And one of the things I was going to mention on the Montrezl Harrell side is picking a TBT over playing in the NBA Summer League or going overseas or things like that really shows the value of what this league is. And it's fantastic to see the growth of it. Andrew, where can the folks find you on social media? And if you don't mind, plug the podcast so that the folks who are super tuned into TBT or want to be can find you.
Yeah. Best spot is at Inside TBT for all TBT related stuff. But I have my personal Twitter as well at Andrew Zoldan, and Drive the Lane Pod is my Ohio State podcast, but that's probably the least interesting to the Louisville fans. But I would check out Inside TBT. We'll have some real good content. And actually, if you go back on Inside TBT and you go back on TBT's YouTube, I did have the opportunity this year to talk to both Russ and Pres in interviews and got to talk to Peyton as well. And we used some of those clips for our hype video to announce that Louisville was hosting again. But check out those interviews with Russ and Pres. Check out your guys' stuff with Russ because that was good stuff. So,
love it, man.
A lot of good content out there.
Yeah. And like I mentioned, if you're not watching TBT or if you haven't been locked in, it is a great little sports season in and of itself for a month or so there. So make sure you check out Andrew's social media, check out the TBT social media. And Andrew, hopefully we'll see you up here in Louisville at Freedom Hall, man. I know I'll be out there for every game, and hopefully we'll be able to get the Kentucky team up here and we don't have to travel to Lexington. We can have a damn good time, man.
You'll definitely see me, and I'm looking forward to hanging out.
Awesome, man. Well, until next time, Starting 502 Podcast, Jacob Lane filling in for Pres Meyer. Go Cards.